Have you ever walked away from a conversation thinking, I should have said something? That moment of silence where you swallowed your truth to keep the peace costs more than you think. Speaking up for yourself doesn't mean being loud, rude, or aggressive. It means knowing your worth, holding your ground, and using your voice with calm, steady power. In the next few minutes, you'll learn how to stop shrinking, start showing up, and speak with the kind of confidence that doesn't shake, no matter who's in the room. Confidence is often misunderstood as something people are born with, something only the naturally outgoing, the extroverted, or the fearless possess. But in truth, confidence isn't a feeling you wait for. It's a choice you make. That's what most people don't realize. They're waiting for the nerves to disappear, the heart to stop racing, the palms to dry before they dare speak up. But confidence doesn't come after those things go away. Confidence comes first. While bombis, those things are still happening. When you choose to stand up for yourself, your voice might tremble, your knees might shake, your thoughts might scramble in your mind, and yet in that messy moment, you still speak. That's confidence, not the absence of fear, but the presence of courage in spite of it. Confidence is the decision to act, not the result of preparation. It's not something you achieve after you've read enough books or rehearsed enough lines. It's something you access in the moment when you decide that your voice matters, even if it quivers. This is where the turning point begins for most people, realizing that the starting line isn't some distant future version of yourself who has it all together. The starting line is the you that exists right now, flawed and afraid, but willing. Willing to speak when it would be easier to stay quiet. Willing to raise a hand in the room when you're installed. Inked is to shrink back. Willing to say, that's not okay with me, even when you know it might ruffle feathers. The problem is, most of us were taught not to rock the boat. We learned early on that speaking up might be labeled as rude, difficult, or disrespectful, so we internalized a rule, stay silent to stay safe. But silence doesn't protect your peace, it only postpones the discomfort. When you don't speak up in the moment, you carry the weight of that silence long after the situation ends. You replay the scene in your head. You come up with all the things you could have said. You feel small, not because the other person made you feel that way, but because you chose not to show up for yourself. The truth is, standing up for yourself doesn't mean attacking others. It doesn't mean dominating a conversation or controlling the room. It means respecting yourself enough to be honest about what you want, what you need, and what you won't tolerate. That kind of honesty isn't always easy. But it is freeing, because when you choose confidence over comfort, you stop betraying yourself to keep the peace with others. Here's the thing. Confidence doesn't always feel good in the moment. In fact, it might feel like the last thing you want to do. But just because something feels uncomfortable doesn't mean it's wrong. Growth is uncomfortable. Speaking up for the first time is uncomfortable. Saying no when you're used to saying yes is uncomfortable. But each time you do it, you send yourself a powerful message. I am worth protecting. I am worth hearing. I matter. Think about the times you've admired someone for speaking up. Maybe they stood their ground in a meeting, corrected a misconception, or calmly disagreed without backing down. You didn't admire them because they were loud or aggressive. You admired them because they chose to show up for themselves. They made a choice, and you can too. The beautiful part is that confidence compounds. Every time you choose to speak, when it's easier to stay quiet, you build trust with yourself. You start to see that you can handle discomfort, you can survive awkward silences, disapproval, or even conflict. And with each experience, the next one gets a little easier. It's like lifting weights. The first time it's hard, but you do it again and again, and one day, the weight that once felt impossible becomes manageable. Confidence works the same way. Another shift happens when you stop chasing the need to feel ready. Waiting to feel ready often becomes an excuse. It's a trap disguised as preparation. You don't need more time, you need more action. The best way to feel ready is to do the thing scared. Say the words nervous, walk into the room uncertain. That's how readiness is built, not in your head, but through movement. People think the words they use are the most important part of speaking up. But that's not true. What matters more than the words is the energy behind them. If you speak with conviction, even if you're unsure of every detail, you'll be heard. Confidence is communicated through presence, posture, and tone. You can say something as simple as, "I don't agree," and if you say it with calm clarity, it will carry weight. On the other hand, you can speak for 5 minutes trying to explain your point, and if you're filled with doubt, people will feel that too. This is why choosing confidence isn't about changing who you are. It's about choosing how you show up. It's about reclaiming your space, not with force, but with certainty. Even quiet voices can carry power when they come from a place of self-respect. You don't have to become someone else. You don't need to act louder, tougher, or more polished. You simply need to decide, "I will no longer silence myself to make others comfortable." Every day presents a new opportunity to make that choice. It could be in a conversation with a friend, a boundary at work, or a moment when someone talks over you. And in each of those moments, you get to choose whether you'll lean back or lean in. Confidence is not about knowing everything. It's about knowing that you can handle whatever happens next. That belief, earned through action, becomes unshakable. So start small. Speak up once today when it feels difficult. Tell the truth in a moment when you'd usually stay quiet. Advocate for yourself in a way that you'd normally reserve for others. And then watch what happens, not just in how others respond, but in how you feel about yourself. That's where the real power begins, not in waiting, but in choosing. There's a common misconception that standing up for yourself requires being loud, aggressive, or dominating. Many people think that in order to be taken seriously, they have to overpower others with their words or energy. But true strength doesn't lie in how loudly you speak, it lies in how clearly you communicate. The quietest voice in the room can be the most powerful when it's anchored in clarity and conviction. Boundaries, when clearly expressed, carry far more authority than any volume ever could. At its core, a boundary is simply a line that defines what is acceptable and what is not. It's not an attack, it's not a punishment, it's not meant to control others. Boundaries exist to protect your peace, your time, your energy, and your values. And when you articulate them clearly and calmly, you begin to reclaim control over your own life. You show others how to treat you, not through confrontation, but through consistency. Many people avoid setting boundaries because they fear being seen as difficult or unkind. But the opposite is true. A person who sets clear boundaries is someone who respects themselves and others enough to communicate directly. When you say, "I'm not available for that right now," or "that doesn't work for me," you're not being rude, you're being honest. And that honesty, delivered calmly and without apology, is what builds trust, not just with others, but with yourself. In conversations, especially high stakes or emotionally charged ones, it can be tempting to escalate, raise your voice, talk over someone, or defend yourself with a barrage of explanations. But clarity doesn't need chaos. A clear, measured sentence delivered with calm assurance often does more to shift the tone of a conversation than any aggressive tactic. The key is not to mirror the other person's intensity. The key is to hold steady in your own. When someone pushes your boundaries, whether intentionally or not, you don't need to match their energy. You don't need to yell to be heard. You can simply state your boundary again, calmly and without hesitation. For example, "I understand that's how you feel, but I'm not okay with that," is a sentence that holds power, not because it's loud, but because it's firm. It communicates your position without attacking the other person. What makes this kind of communication so impactful is the certainty behind it. When you speak with clarity, you remove room for misinterpretation. You're not leaving people to guess what you meant. You're not sending mixed signals or trying to soften your message to keep everyone comfortable. You're being direct, and in a world that often dances around the truth, directness stands out. This doesn't mean being cold or harsh. You can be clear and still be kind. You can hold a boundary and still be respectful. In fact, the more secure you are in your communication, the less likely you are to resort to defensiveness or passive aggression. You're not trying to control the outcome. You're simply stating what's true for you and allowing others to respond however they choose. Sometimes people will test your boundaries. They'll push back, question you, or try to guilt you into bending. This is where many people falter. They confuse someone else's discomfort with their own wrongdoing. But discomfort is not a sign that you've done something wrong. It's a sign that someone else is being forced to adjust to a new standard, and that's not your burden to carry. The more you practice speaking with clarity, the more you'll see how much it simplifies your interactions. You'll no longer need to over-explain yourself or justify your choices. You won't feel trapped in conversations where you're trying to manage someone else's emotions. You'll speak your truth calmly and directly and let it land where it lands. That freedom is one of the greatest gifts you can give yourself. It's also important to remember that boundaries aren't just for difficult conversations. They're part of everyday communication. Saying, "I need a moment to think about that," or "let me get back to you tomorrow," is a way of asserting your space. It's a way of saying, "My time and my process matter." You don't owe people immediate access to your decisions, your emotions, or your energy. By claiming that space, you reinforce your own self-respect, and others begin to respect it too. Clarity becomes especially powerful when it's consistent. If you draw a line one day and ignore it the next, people get confused, they don't know where you stand, and they start to test your limits. But when you consistently communicate your boundaries, even in small ways, people begin to understand that you mean what you say. You're not unpredictable, you're not reactive, you're reliable. And in the long run, that earns far more respect than any moment of yelling ever could. The foundation of clear boundary setting is knowing your values. When you know what matters to you, it becomes much easier to recognize when something crosses a line. It becomes easier to say no, to walk away, to speak up. You're not reacting out of emotion, you're responding from principle. That's a very different kind of power. It's steady, not shaky, intentional, not impulsive. In moments of confrontation or pressure, running to that clarity is your anchor. You don't have to convince anyone. You don't have to change anyone's mind. You just have to express your truth and hold your line. That might mean walking away from an unhealthy conversation. It might mean repeating your boundary without engaging in the argument. It might mean accepting that not everyone will understand your stance and being okay with that. Speaking with clarity and setting boundaries doesn't promise a conflict-free life, but it does promise a more honest one. And in that honesty, you'll find peace. You'll waste less energy trying to manage perceptions or dodge tension. You'll stop shrinking yourself to make room for others. Instead, you'll stand firm in who you are and what you need, not because you're trying to control anyone, but because you've decided to take responsibility for your own well-being. That decision changes everything. It changes how you communicate, how you show up, how others respond to you, and most importantly, how you feel about yourself at the end of the day. Because when you speak with clarity, you walk away knowing that you stood in your truth, and that no matter how anyone else reacts is where real strength lives. In difficult conversations, moments of pressure, or emotionally charged exchanges, the instinct to react immediately can feel overwhelming. There's an internal urgency, a rush to fill silence, defend yourself, or assert control. But within that chaos lies a simple, often overlooked tool: the pause. It's quiet, it's subtle, and yet it carries more influence than most people realize. The pause is where real power lives. It's not just a break in conversation, it's a conscious reclaiming of your voice, your presence, and your composure. Most people think confidence is about always having the right thing to say, but it's not. Confidence is about knowing when not to speak. It's knowing when to slow down instead of speeding up. In high-stress moments, especially when you feel attacked, dismissed, said, or talked over, there's a split second where everything inside you wants to react. That's the moment to pause, not to retreat, not to freeze, but to breathe, to buy yourself time, to choose your response with intention rather than impulse. A pause isn't a sign that you've lost your words. It's a sign that you're controlling the room. While others may talk over one another, rush to speak, or escalate emotions, you hold your ground with silence. That silence speaks volumes. It creates tension, but not the kind that breaks. It's the kind that commands attention. It says, "I'm not reacting to your energy, I'm setting the tone." What makes the pause so powerful is that it creates space. Space to think, space to listen, space to recalibrate. Without space, conversations become collisions. But when you insert a pause, you break the momentum of confusion or aggression. You give yourself a moment to center. In that stillness, you're no longer caught in the spin of emotion. You're in control, not just of your words, but of your energy, your presence, and your position. One of the biggest mistakes people make in moments of confrontation is thinking they have to respond right away. That urgency often leads to over-explaining, defensiveness, or regrettable words. But the truth is, you're allowed to take your time. You're allowed to say, "Let me think about that," or "I'll get back to you." You're allowed to pause before answering a question. You don't owe anyone an instant reaction, especially when the conversation is difficult or the stakes are high. There's also a deeper psychological effect to the pause. When you pause, you create uncertainty in the mind of the other person. They don't know what you're thinking. They're forced to wait. That shift in dynamic places the attention back on you, and with that attention comes influence. While they wait, you prepare. And when you speak, your words land with weight because they weren't rushed. They were chosen. The pause also allows you to manage your emotions more effectively. Anger, anxiety, frustration, all of these feelings rise quickly in moments of tension. If you respond immediately, your words often reflect that emotional spike. But if you pause, even for a few seconds, you give your nervous system a chance to regulate. You signal to your body that you're safe, that you don't need to fight or flee. From that calm space, your voice becomes steady, your thoughts become clearer, and your message becomes stronger. In professional settings, mastering the pause can change how people perceive you. The person who doesn't rush to speak, who takes a breath before answering, and who holds silence with ease is often seen as thoughtful, composed, and authoritative. It's not about saying more, it's about saying less, but meaning more. The pause helps you eliminate filler words, hedging phrases, and unnecessary explanations. It sharpens your message and increases your impact. In personal relationships, the pause becomes a tool of empathy. It allows you to listen more deeply, to not just hear the words being said, but to understand the emotions beneath them. When someone says something hurtful or surprising, the immediate response might be to defend or counterattack. But when you pause, you create a moment to ask yourself, what's really going on here? Is this about me or is this about something they're carrying? That moment of reflection can completely shift the direction of a conversation, preventing escalation and fostering understanding. The pause also helps you break patterns of people-pleasing. So often people agree to things they don't want, say yes when they mean no, or minimize their needs in real time. But if you pause, just a breath, you give yourself space to check in. Is this right for me? Do I actually want to say this? That pause becomes the doorway to self-advocacy. It creates room for a more aligned response. Pausing doesn't mean avoiding conflict. It means approaching conflict with strategy rather than reactivity. It's the difference between sparring blindly and choosing each move with precision. It doesn't require you to win every exchange. It requires you to stay centered in who you are and what you stand for, even when the situation tries to pull you off balance. For those who fear silence, learning to pause can feel uncomfortable at first. But silence isn't your enemy. It's your leverage. It's where you find your footing before you speak. Where you align your thoughts with your truth, where you gather the strength to say what needs to be said, not louder but clearer. Once you experience the power of a well-placed pause, you'll stop fearing those gaps in conversation. You'll start to value them as your strongest moments. Over time, the pause becomes a natural part of how you communicate. It stops being something you force and starts being something you flow into. It becomes a habit, a rhythm, a sign of your maturity and confidence. People begin to notice that you don't rush, you don't stumble, you speak when you're ready, and when you do, your words carry authority, not because of their volume, but because of their intention. There is a quiet mastery in the pause. It's the space where confidence is born, where emotions are tempered, and where clarity is shaped. In every conversation, you have a choice: to react or to pause. And in that pause, you find not just your voice, but your power. Confidence is often mistaken for charisma, perfection, or a booming voice that fills the room. But real confidence isn't about being the loudest or the most polished, it's about being consistent. The most confident voice is not the one that dominates, but the one that shows up steadily, day after day, situation after situation, with integrity, honesty, and calm conviction. It's not built in moments of spotlight, but in the quiet choices to speak up, stay true to your values, and own your presence, regardless of the audience or the outcome. Consistency creates trust, both in others and in yourself. When you communicate in a way that aligns with your beliefs repeatedly, people begin to understand who you are. They learn how to interpret your tone, your boundaries, your expectations. They don't have to second guess you, because you've shown them through consistent action what to expect. And more importantly, you begin to build internal self-trust. You stop questioning whether you'll back down in hard conversations. You start showing up with the quiet knowing, I've done this before and I'll do it again. One of the most damaging things to confidence is inconsistency. When someone fluctuates between silence and explosion, between people-pleasing and aggression, their words lose weight. Their message feels unstable. People begin to tread lightly around them, not out of respect, but uncertainty. But when you communicate with consistency, even if your message isn't always what people want to hear, they respect you for it. They may not agree with you, but they trust that you're being real. This kind of consistency doesn't require you to have all the answers. It just requires you to be honest in the moment. If you're unsure, say you're unsure. If you need time, ask for time. If something doesn't feel right, express that clearly and calmly. Over time, these small, honest moments stack up. They build a foundation others can stand on, and they also reinforce your own sense of stability. You don't have to rehearse or pretend. You just keep showing up as the same version of yourself, no matter who's in the room. That stability becomes your power. In conversations at work, with family, in friendships or partnerships, people begin to know that when you speak, it matters. You're not saying things for attention. You're not posturing or overcompensating. You're just grounded in your message. And because your message is consistent, it carries more impact. There's no performance in it, only presence. A consistent voice is also a calm one. You don't need to over-explain or oversell your point when you're used to standing in your truth. You say what needs to be said with just enough words, and then you stop. This kind of brevity isn't cold, it's clear. It signals that you trust your own words to stand on their own. You don't feel the need to overcompensate because you've said what you meant and you meant what you said. This is especially important in difficult or emotionally charged conversations. It's easy to let emotions lead you off course. But when you've practiced consistent communication, you've trained yourself to come back to your center. You've developed a voice that doesn't waver with approval or bend under pressure. You don't have to raise your volume because your consistency has already earned you a level of respect that yelling never could. Another dimension of this consistency is alignment. You speak the same way to everyone, not just to those in positions of power, but also to those who can't offer you anything. That integrity shows. People recognize when your voice changes based on who's watching, but they also recognize when your words stay rooted, regardless of circumstance. And when your public voice matches your private one, when your tone with clients matches your tone with your family, people start to see you as someone solid, someone who means what they say and follows through. Confidence becomes unshakable when your inner voice and outer voice are in sync. That means not just saying confident things out loud, but also speaking to yourself with that same level of respect. You're not putting on a show in front of others while tearing yourself down in your mind. Instead, you're reinforcing a narrative internally that says, I know who I am. I know what I stand for. I will speak from that place no matter the setting. When you practice consistency, you also remove a huge source of anxiety from your life. You're no longer caught in the exhausting loop of performing, managing impressions, or scripting the perfect response. You don't need to remember who you were last time because you haven't changed your message. You've become predictable, not in a boring way, but in a grounded, trustworthy way. And that kind of predictability creates a safe space for others. People feel more at ease when they know they're talking to someone who won't shift with the wind. There's also a compounding effect that comes with this kind of steady communication. Each time you show up with clarity and alignment, you reinforce your own self-respect. You're no longer trying to win everyone over. You're not measuring your words based on how they'll be received. You're speaking from a place of wholeness, and that wholeness is felt even when you say no, even when you disagree, even when you hold firm. Being consistent in how you speak doesn't mean you never grow or change your mind. It means you're honest about when you do. It means if your thinking evolves, you acknowledge it clearly instead of pretending you've always believed something. That humility is part of confidence too. People don't need perfection from you. They need authenticity. And authenticity requires you to be the same person in different rooms at different times with different people. When you carry a consistent voice, you become someone others look to during uncertainty. In moments of tension or confusion, people instinctively turn toward those who are calm, grounded, and clear. Not the loudest, not the most dramatic, just the most centered. That's what consistent communication builds. A sense of leadership, even if you're not in a leadership role. Because true leadership is not about position, it's about presence. Your words don't have to be grand or eloquent to be powerful. They just need to be true and consistently so. You don't have to change the way you speak based on the setting. You don't have to perform for people to like you. The most confident people speak the same truth in every room. They trust that who they are, expressed steadily and sincerely, is enough. And over time, that trust becomes their greatest strength